I will not be tweeting. I will be playing violin. Is that okay? Yeah. Because I was listening this morning, since 8 o'clock I've been here. What kind of words are coming? And I hear innovation, strategy, productive disruption. No, creative disruption. Was it creative disruption? Yeah, you see? I talk about productive resignation, but that comes at 2 o'clock. It is a very powerful leadership tool. But what I would like to do right now, before we have a minister, we are very much looking to innovation ideas afterwards, Mr. Koprivnica. I would like to tell you that innovation is not just technology. Innovation can be something that is very old and it can become very modern, very much future-bearing. If I take the violin and play... And so on. This is 300 years old. This is Johann Sebastian Bach. But what do we hear? Do we actually know to listen? Maybe in this, if we go by creative destruction, what do we learn for today? What do the masterpieces teach us? I heard this morning once the word resonance. Yes. If we create in organizations a resonance platform, the resonance space, I'll tell you, many things move beyond ego problems and politics. So, what do we hear now? Let me quickly give an example, and we continue later this afternoon. You hear this? This is the beginning of the fugue. The first thing you hear is this. What do you hear? It is like vision. Yeah. It is like purpose. Goal, that's where you want to go. Passion behind, we talk about passion. So where do we hear the passion? In the arts. The first thing is vision. Is that clear? Do you hear it? The inner horizon. So what is the next thing that we hear in this subject of the fugue C major? We hear this. The second is this. It says da dee 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 ba. Yeah. So the second thing is mobilization above and below. Because if you only have vision, how many visions do you get in the government and nothing happens? Visions, yeah, nothing happens. So the second step is mobilization. Everything above, everything below. And what's then? What's the next thing? Action. Then it's action. It says pa, 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 pa. So there you go. Yeah. All right. So you see, in the beginning of the fugue, you have 3 rules that are necessary to implement something. Don't call it execute. Execution comes from military. Yeah. So CEO is no chief exec. It's a chief empowerment officer. That's a new one I have done. Yeah? Do you like that? Chief empowerment officer. So, what is this telling you? What is above? Yeah, what is above? Yeah, about is technology. Yeah, technology cloud. We are in a cloud. We have our head in a cloud of technology. We think that's the whole reality, right? I know what you mean. It's very important that we have technology. But what is below? What is here? What is here? Yeah, here is the real thing. Human potential. What we don't practice every day. Genius. Once and never again. Meaning. Unconditional love. These things don't fall on your head. They have to be practiced. And the great art is the pathway of learning to become truly human. And if we have the balance between the two, then we have that what we want to have in Slovenia, right? The real innovation, human and technological in a balance. I am working on this with European identity, and you will hear about it at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Don't miss it. I'm the only one who is doing it, yes? Very good. Thank you very much. So please start with you. Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much. That's a hard act to beat. Very inspiring. We have, I think, what promises to be a very interesting conversation about innovation in the Slovenian context, but I think you can't have that conversation without thinking of it in a global context. But what I thought I'd do first is just share a few thoughts with you. So we have a bit of a shared language. Innovation can sound like a very ephemeral term. It can be everything and nothing. So I wanted to give you a few examples. Sorry guys, make sure there we go. But before we do that, I was hoping we could try something. We're using an application for all of those of you who love devices, who have devices in your pocket. This will be, I used to teach in university for 10 years. I used to tell students to put devices away. This will be the only time in my life I say, take those out and go to this website, slido.com. This will be your way to ask questions. We can take polls as we go along. So I will moderate and facilitate the conversation here, but this will give you a chance to do it. And if you go there, you'll see something along this line, but the important thing for you to keep in mind is we have an event number. It's V728. And if you put that in there, you should be in our event. And from time to time, stuff will pop up. All right, so we're going to do two quick tests. One is we're going to take a poll, and I think we have a I'm from poll. So for those of you who want to use this, let's just warm it up for a second. And why don't you click? All right. So you can see people in real time are giving their feedback. That's why these percentages are adjusting accordingly. All right. So we have 32. All right. And we'll close it now. This is just for warm-up purposes, and we'll do a second thing. Is we're going to take, ask a question. And if there's something that you would like the panel to answer in terms of innovation, this debate about innovation that we're going to have, feel free to post it up. I don't know if we can switch it back now to the to our tool. And you can see as people put stuff up. This was my great question I had. What time is it? Right? And so as you put your own questions in there, we have a moderator who will bring them up. So from time to time, we'll see what's on the screen. We can ask them. You can also give thumbs up to other people's questions, so the more popular questions will rise up. All right? So anybody who wants to use this as an alternative way to bring questions in real time, it's something we'll look to from time to time. All right. So let's go back to the presentation. And let me maybe say a few words. First of all, it's my great honor to be the panel moderator. We have a very diverse panel of both Slovenian, both government, both business, but also international panelists. My own background, I've been 10 years at Harvard as a professor, 5 years in the Finnish government for the Finnish Innovation Fund, and in the last 4 years I have my own practice. The last 15 plus years I've worked on helping governments being innovative, which may seem an oxymoron to some of you, but is part of this conversation. So let me say a few words here about our topic. I'll read a little paragraph I wrote up and then give you a few examples. Then I'll ask the panelists to come up and we'll get started. I think when we talk about the role of innovation in a new reality, when we talk about innovation, much of the general narrative around innovation hasn't been about a technology. I think that's probably, if you ask people in the street, what do they associate innovation with? It's probably most likely technology. Right? While that is sometimes the case, we need to see innovation in a broader context as a lever for transformation that is as much about technology as it is about services, processes, organizational or social innovation. So there's many dimensions to this. Right? What does this innovation landscape look like? How are the various actors from business to government positioning their thinking and assets? What are roles and partnership models that can help society best meet its growing 21st century challenges and opportunities? This will be very broadly what we're going to talk about. I think the purpose that we hope to accomplish today will to focus on business and think about what innovation means in there. Let me put it in a very overly simplistic way. Is innovation, as we may want to understand it, a nice to have or must have? and how our business is built to deliver new ideas to the marketplace. Right? Innovations aren't just ideas, but it's that translation to bringing them to market. I think we would also like to hear from government and what is that relationship. I think our premise here will be that to do the kinds of innovations we need today to be competitive, we need more collaboration that is creative in nature, not just transactional in nature. Frequently we collaborate, but we just share things, but we don't work together on them. I think we need more invention. We need to create new solutions, not just copy-paste solutions. Right? And this is across barriers, across organizations, sectors, and geographies. So I think at the core of this is to figure out how we can get people who have very different visions about the world work together. I hope we'll speak 70% about business and 30% about government, if that's okay with you. We're going to keep it very conversational. I told the panelists, think of this as a dinner conversation. So I'll prompt to have a conversation. I'll interrupt. I'll be the dumb one in the room, and I'll be the devil's advocate in the room. All right? All right, so let me give you just a few quick examples, and then we'll get started. We talk about innovation in a changed reality. So what is that new reality? It's easy to latch onto these things. I think this is actually a symptom of a much more fundamental change that's happening. And the change could be captured, at least in part, by this kind of demographic shift or income shift. And if we look at, in terms of purchase power parity, the people who earned the least in 1970 are earning even less. And the people who earned more are earning even more. So we know the gap between the have and the have-nots is increasing and is creating social instability. And I think the Trumps of the world are a reflection that in this tension, there's a rejection of traditional institutions. And here I would just posit that it's not just government institutions, also business institutions. And we could look at this. If I took a map of the US, this from one disease, but you could do any disease you want, this is where you're most likely to have a stroke. You're going to die or have long-term disability. The darker parts are. Right? So you have a higher chance of getting sick based on your zip code. And you'll see there's actually a stroke belt in the US. There's also a poverty belt, so to speak, and these actually coincide quite nicely. And some have hypothesized that maybe the root cause of this may be found in maps like this. This is the Civil War divide. And perhaps these new boundaries that we drew the last 300 years across the globe have actually not been resolved. So Trump is just a symptom of a much deeper thing that, yes, we see in government, but I would posit, and I'd like to challenge our panel, that also affects the trust in institutions, both government and business. The new reality is that the globe doesn't abide by the geographies that we drew. This is connectivity across. Actually, we're creating new kinds of geographies all the time. And they defy a lot of the governance models and a lot of the agreements we have. It even defies what it means to be Slovenian or Finnish like me. How do we define that in this day and age when people have multiple backgrounds at the same time? We have, in this context, a radical shift in demographics globally. We have built a society and business innovations based on a young, growing population. But what happens when that population becomes increasingly old in demographics? This is WHO data. This is 250, so not that far from now. And then this is in 2100. We see this as a global issue. And in Finland, we're freaking out because from a business government perspective, it means we have less public money, more people in retirement, less people working, with a higher degree of social services. But from a business perspective, we could also imagine that this is a huge opportunity. We talk in Europe, for example, that there is no growth. This is at least a huge growth arena. The problem is we're not creating the services and the products that are needed for this new demographic at the rate in which it's needed. So the changing landscape has many, many contexts, and we need to think about innovation differently. I think we need to think about progress, because many of us have tied innovation to an idea of what progress is. What's a better future? I love this statement by Andy, sorry you can't see it, he's the chief economist for the Bank of England. Since 1750, so the Industrial Revolution, has taken around 50 years for living standards to double. Before that, it would have taken 1,000 years. Imagine the generations in our family chain that were born in 1700 or in 1600. They waited around for thousands of years with nothing changing. And then we had basically a science-based way of thinking about progress. And that is the legacy that we've been built on now. And while we do have big science questions ahead of us, that may not be the key to the kinds of innovations we need to do. So we've inherited this amazing success, and it makes it very difficult for us to see what new kind of success or concept of progress do we need. I think innovation in businesses and governments have been about innovative parts, a car, a pencil, or something, and we're getting more and more into actually having to manage innovative wholes. Climate change, energy, big holes, right? When I worked for the Finnish government, to do sustainable development meant you need energy policy, you need food, you need transportation. This means different businesses are working together. And I think this means not just business and government, but high degree of trust. We're traditionally in that 1750s idea about progress. We competed amongst each other. Today, more and more, we recognize we actually have to bring those different bits of knowledge together. I think there's an inherent challenge in both business and government between change and stability. Governments are built for long-term stability. We have a responsibility to the next generation and the next generation. And yet, our day-to-day changes like this. And we're constantly asked to innovate. So how do we do that? How do we answer shareholder value in the next quarter and yet be a responsible company that has a long legacy? This is very challenging. And what about the risk of doing versus the risk of not doing? I think a lot of innovation discussion is framed around the idea that doing innovative things means taking more risks. And I'd like to challenge the group here to think inversely. That actually doing innovation is a way of mitigating risk. Because we underestimate the risk of the status quo, how dangerous it is to continue to do things as we've always done, and we overestimate the risk of doing new things because they're new. They're unknown. For many, innovations could be something like this, right? It's not just a car. It's not just about energy and storage systems, but it's infrastructure. It has that systemic effect. But I'm curious, what is the organization behind this? What are the people? How do you build them? What's the culture that's able to produce this? OXO, cutlery for people with arthritic challenges. So can you take a problem in the marketplace and actually make a product that is not just better for them, but better for everybody else? Or in Finland, for example, social innovations like street food. That suddenly, when it appeared for the first time, was completely illegal. And the reason why it was illegal is that the city could not figure out whether that was a car or a restaurant. And because it couldn't figure out who licensed it, it must be illegal. So they shut it down. So we're getting new forms of businesses emerging, and yet government structures aren't organized to support it. They do the contrary. So you know what these two kids did next? They did something much bigger, much more illegal. They organized on Facebook what is called Restaurant Day, twice a year in Helsinki. Anybody, you and I, can open up a restaurant in our kitchen. In fact, you walk the streets of Helsinki and you see people lowering down an empanada from their kitchen window, and somebody puts €5 up and it goes back up and down. Completely illegal restaurants with hundreds of thousands of people in the street breaking the law. What does government do? You arrest Facebook that coordinates it? You shut down thousands of restaurants? Or do you arrest people? These new logics, new opportunities, defy the inherited logics of government. And so governments are facing the pressure to innovate themselves and address these opportunities. And then the last thing I wanted to bring as an example, I was in Thailand. I'm doing some work for the United Nations. This is the mangosteen fruit, right? They're very proud of it. There's a region in Thailand that is a great producer of this. And one of the ministers there asked, our challenge is, how do we get this fruit to the global marketplace? It means to any one of your homes within 24 hours. And that's a fantastic challenge. It's very focused. And if you were to do that, what would you need to do? You need to build infrastructure. You need to build logistics. You need to go into communities and train farmers and give them business tools, educate them. You need to do water management. Right? You're getting into education. You're getting into natural resources. You're getting into climate change questions. And soon and behold, you realize what you're doing is very aligned with what governments do. Right? So maybe the divide we've always thought that government and business is antagonistic needs to be much more collaborative, because to bring this fruit to market as a business opportunity requires a cascade of effects that have broad social benefit to them. So can we partner on meeting sustainable development goals? All right, so we'll go back to our big title here. And sorry, my clicker is not working with me. There we go. Okay, so what I will ask is, we have a fabulous panel. Why don't the panelists come up? I'm going to just forewarn you, I noticed stickers are coming off. So if you sit down, you might want to take the sticker off, or you may be walking around in the afternoon with the sticker on your back. So why don't our panelists come up, and then I'll do a brief introduction of you, okay? All right, yes, thank you. Great. So I am going to roam here, okay? Hopefully I won't make you too nervous. I notice the temperature's a bit hot, or maybe it's just me. So if there's a way to crack the window a bit more or turn up the cooling just a little bit, it might help a little bit. I'm going to apologize to the panel. I am going to butcher your names, but I'll do the best that I can. So I'm going in the order that I have here. So we have Ranko Jelica. Yes, did I get that right? Okay. From the Management Board Telecom Slovenia. Very nice to have you here. We have Sirpa Kekkonen from Head of Government Strategy Secretariat in the PM's office in Finland. So we'll bring a government perspective to this. We have Boris Koprivnikar. Yeah, okay. You forgive me today. So Minister of Public Administration in the Republic of Slovenia. We'll come back to you in a moment. I'll start with you with a few questions. We have Michael Lau, Senior Wealth Manager from Hong Kong, so bringing an Asian perspective to the conversation. Mark Pleško, yes, okay, good. CEO, Cozy Lab from Slovenia, who will bring a business startup perspective to this. Mr. Gregor Potočar, Managing Director, SAP Slovenia. Robert Trenovic. Okay, sorry. You come to Finland and then you can you can say our names, okay? So, Director General Microsoft Slovenia, and then Juni Tsuda from bringing a Japanese perspective here, Representative Director Chairman of the Board, Yaskawa Electric Corporation, in the business of robots, if I remember correctly. All right, so a broad and good perspective. I think for the outsiders, we've talked a little bit. Bring that outside perspective. So not everybody has to be an expert in Slovenia. I would actually argue that it's in your best interest. But Minister, let's start. I have a few questions just to kind of start with the government perspective on this. As Deputy Minister and Minister of Public Affairs, you also hold the title of Chief Digitalization Officer. What do you think are sort of the efficiency approaches for digital transformation? Does the focus lie mainly in technology, or how do you see this question? Sure. Do we have mics, hand mics? Yes. So, if that's a little bit easier, maybe.
Fine. Well, definitely, digitalization is not only about technology, because technology only enables or gives opportunity how we can use it. And from the governmental perspective, as we understand it, we look on the digitalization in two ways. One is how the government is digitalized and better functioned. In that way, we started the centralization approach, because I strongly believe that if you have a digital solutions, it's like a nerve system of an organism, and if you don't have one center to coordinate it, then you have, I don't know, Parkinson's disease, where limbs are uncontrolled. So from the governmental point, centralization, building the clouds and sharing the information, the bus protecting and everything else. but from the wider society view, I think that the key point is that you build the environment, and we call it productivity sandwich. That means fast networks in the ground, fast wireless network in the sky, and a lot of open data. This is the key trigger, because the products and the solutions for the people will later on grow on that ground. This is maybe the key point, and when you introduce digitalization, you always have to talk about the solutions for the people, solutions for the workers, never about the computers. Because we use digitalization because we like it, we can communicate better, or we can work better. So digitalization is to improve our performance, and this is the main goal.
Yeah. So could you maybe, you talk about sort of opening up and a collaborative nature of that, but could you share maybe a concrete example with us, what that might mean?
Well, I personally strongly believe that nothing that lasts cannot be built in complex environment without wide cooperation. It's single person or single entity even cannot build nothing that would last in the environment. So we always have to build in cooperation. Our key problem was, it was already talked a lot before about it, is how to work with the businesses and the governments. We started a project we called Innovation for the Change. No, how it's Partnership for a Change. I always lose this name, but that was a fantastic project where we said we will not explain to the businesses how good the government is. We will say, do you want to exchange workers? We started with one ministry, few companies, then with more ministries, and last time we are talking of tens of companies and majority of the ministries, and the result was fantastic because they established or find out that we are quite normal people fighting to solve the problems which are quite complex, and our colleagues find out that in business they work a little bit different, but not so much different, so that we are very much alike. And this was foundation that we start to really cooperate daily. And today we have a lot of teams in which when I follow them, I don't know which one is from the government and which one is from the company. And this is how you start to build a new value. And this is working.
So in this narrative that you outline a bit, when we think about innovation, invariably it also means making mistakes. Whether the first times you try something and you realize it didn't quite work and you adjust it, how should we think about making mistakes in a public administration context, specifically given that it's a political context and we all know that mistakes don't play out well in politics always?
That's hard. That's even harder because Europe is not very fun about so-called failure culture, and especially in the politics, it's really hard. We do find some way that are working. First, you have to innovate not because you want to invent something new, but because environment changed so radically that we have to innovate our interaction with the environment. This is why we are forced to innovate. And when you innovate, you definitely have to have failures. The only way is that you explain, have a lot of dialogue about it, and when you have failure, you have to have failure on a small step. So if you want to fall fast and then find something new. And a lot of communication. That's the way. We are afraid of this. We did a lot of projects and we did some mistakes. We communicated mistakes, and even with the media and the public, we had no serious problem because we said the failure is a process of the innovation. And it was not so radical. But you don't fail, I don't know, on accepting the national budget. You can fail on something small first, and then you adopt this, accept these failures.
So maybe arguably it's a bit about expectation management. So if you're forthcoming about mistakes are part of this, the media might be more responsive to this.
Yes, that's important, and important is also for innovative solutions, you need to have innovative colleagues. There was a lot of talkings before how to do it, but if you don't allow people to fail, and I always say, if you make a mistake because you meant well and because you did your homework, it's okay. But if you made a mistake because you were lazy or not motivated, then I have a problem with your mistake. But if you make a mistake as a process of growing, then, well, I have to support my colleagues because the next innovative solution maybe is the one that we are searching for. Otherwise, they will not bring it to me.
So maybe a last question, maybe to veer just a little bit, but what's the role of leadership in introducing innovation successfully into organizations? What's the role of leaders in this equation?
I strongly believe that the role of leader in every organization is the most crucial. If you put 100 or 1,000 people together, they are more or less the same. But some groups are extremely successful and some groups are extremely unsuccessful. But they have the same distribution of talents, interests, gender, I don't know, whatever. So what's the difference? Leaders. And role of leadership is to, as I understand it, to set a clear vision, which is not vision of a leader, but vision of a group, because we can live, we want this vision together. That's one important point. And second is that you set values. Because if you have values which are universal, what we appreciate and what we don't appreciate, then you can decide quickly in daily basis. Because when you have a question, you know based on our values what will be the answer. So this is the way how you speed up the change and speed up the organization.
Okay. Thank you very much, Minister. I'm going to open this up now, and I will encourage anybody to jump up at any moment and to interrupt and to grab somebody's, and I'll try to steer this best. But I'd like to hear maybe from the business community. We have, I think, a group of people who represent national but also international businesses, startups, SMEs, and large corporations. So there's a nice broad spectrum of that. If I was within your organizations at the sort of board level, how do you think, in a strategic perspective, should this innovation conversation be framed? As a naive board member, how should I be thinking about it? And to be a bit devil's advocate, if we go back to the chief economist's statement, you know, progress has been amazing since 1750. So guys, why change? Yes, maybe, you know, efficiencies, but is innovation the way we've been thinking about it correct, or are we seeing something fundamentally different? I don't know if anybody wants to grab and share from their own perspective how you think about innovation in your organization. And I got a couple roaming microphones. You can also use those. Why don't you take this? And if we have a couple more hands, mics, that would be great.
Well, my view is that innovation is just doing things differently from anybody else. Obviously, if you want to beat your competition, you shouldn't play the game the way they play it. That's it. So it's not innovation, you know, I wouldn't say we have to innovate because innovation is great. Once you do things from an ideological point of view, they don't work anymore. Then it's ideology or religion, whatever. Innovation just means that if somebody does it the way you do it, you have to do it better or differently. And that's, by definition, already innovation. That's all. That's all to it, nothing else.
So, does it work?
Yeah,
okay.
that's on.
So for me, the innovation, it's a process that starts with yourself. So I don't know who should start it in terms of an idea point of view, but basically the business leader, the CEO, the CMO, whatever, should be the sponsor and should be the initiator. So let's say in my career, I started it as a marketing director. I was innovating businesses, although I was not the board level. So it doesn't matter who is it. But at the other hand, it's a very personal, because innovation and failure can bring basically huge personal changes in your life. And this is maybe a problem in our country because not many people are willing to travel, to change the place where they live, and so on. So I think the innovation from starting point should be board level sponsored, or, in my opinion, should be board level done at the start. The cultural change too. Everything around the mission, because personally for me the mission is the most important thing, and this is where you spend the most of your time and where you basically glue everybody around it. But the other hand, you should be also be personally, it doesn't matter what's the culture, whether this is our culture, kind of conservative or other innovative. You should be ready to take, you know, consequences for your decisions, and you should be ready to even step out, even to move somewhere else, to change, pursue some other changes, you know, in your life. So you should move with your family and so on. So if you want to be innovative, you should be very open. So if you're not open as a person, I personally believe that you cannot be known.
So there's a couple of things already there that I'll just kind of put as topics. Clearly, how you think about your HR is very important. So if I subscribe to that, I'd be very keen on getting people who have that openness. But let me also push back, and you don't need to answer this, but I'd be curious from the business sector to be a bit of a devil's advocate. I think we hear a lot of rhetoric about, we need, companies to be innovative, boards to own that. The reality is, unfortunately, big organizations, for good reasons, tend to also be slow by nature. From my own country, the fall of Nokia, I think, is a great example of how organizations just wake up too late. So how do we bridge the gap between the kind of rhetoric of we need to be smarter and more innovative to actually behaving in big organizations differently?
Maybe from...
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, jump in.
I mean, first of all, about the innovation itself, I mean, the whole progress of the mankind was built on innovation, which then sparked industrial revolutions, and the current one, the digital one, is nothing else than that. So a lot of innovation at one point in time, and significant change in the quality of life of the mankind. When it comes to innovating in the corporations, and if they're slow or not, or too slow or not, if you look at the Forbes list of 100 biggest corporations on the planet, it changes. It changes dramatically. From 1950s, it changed 80+%. So not everybody is there anymore. So obviously, innovating yourself time and time again, it's not an easy thing. On the other hand, what successful companies usually do is mainly two things. One is a very strong vision, where to go and why to go to that destination. And that vision, of course, it's not enough that it's on the paper. It needs to be, and that's the second pillar in my opinion, it needs to be embedded into the corporate culture. Innovating today is not a discipline which happens in one specific department. Innovating is something what happens across different functions in the corporations, which of course are highly integrated. But the ground is culture, and we talked. I mean, you touched the culture a little bit before. I guess we will more. Is culture and the vision, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Michael, you wanted to jump in, and then maybe we could put up if people have questions as a reminder, you can populate that. Go ahead.
Okay, so I work for a large corporation. I work for AI International, which is the largest pan-Asia insurance company, and also one of the largest insurance companies in the world. I think for us as a corporation, I think innovation is one of the key areas that we focus on. And the evidence is that in Hong Kong, at least traditionally, if you want to, I'm talking about frontline agency Salesforce, if you need to apply for insurance policy, it's all the paperwork that you need to fill out. But nowadays, we push a new system. There's a system that interacts with the customers. So we launch a new interactive point of sales where you can get instant quotation, you can fill out financial needs analysis, you can complete the application with electronic signature, and even make payments on an iPad. And then between the operation and the company and also the Salesforce, and they also create a new system that's it's an interactive mobile office that basically, as a manager, you can actually do recruitment, you can do monitoring your sales team, everything basically out of your phone and iPad. But having said that, like after launching that program, and you could imagine, because innovation is not always accepted right off the bat, so people don't use it. And so I think the key point in terms of innovation within an organization, one of the key points is persistency. So I think first thing is that you have the very firm vision, that you are very firm on innovation. That's one. Second is persistency. So they actually, you need to keep pushing, so that to make sure that top-down, the message from top-down will get sent abroad to bottom. And then eventually, hopefully, you have a bottom-up approach.
Yeah. Can I challenge you just a little bit, or just query a little bit more this idea of sort of maybe strong leadership and strong vision has come up directly and indirectly. But what does a business do when we're talking about innovation in this new reality, where things are more volatile and less predictable? We cannot have clear vision that's based on our understanding what will happen. Did you want to jump in?
Actually, we know the word of innovation for hundreds of years, but one of the reasons why we are so keen to the innovation is that technology is changing the world, and especially this connected world. I mean, people are connected to each other these days, and then the number of nodes may be the same number of people, but the number of connections is different. It's network. It's endless. So changes are exponential. And connection of two different cultures is easy now. And then in our company, actually, we have 12,000 people with $4 billion of sales. And then first thing we did was that at least board members cannot understand the innovation at all. So we don't say anything about it. We are motivators. We do promotion. But we get all the voices from the people, and we evaluate. But if maybe we say, current leaders or board members cannot even evaluate. So we leave those to the young people, and then we made it happen. And then good thing for these days is that it doesn't cost much because of the infrastructures are there. So maybe we now have 100 failures with one success. It was not accessible a long time ago. Maybe we need to have half of 50% of the success rate. But now it's very good stage in a sense, but it may bring a big scale of disastrous situation. So we have to be very careful how to implement those ideas. And maybe I want to talk too much.
Yeah,
but
we'll come back to that. But I had a
yes.
very quick follow-up question for you before I know the minister wanted to say something. So you describe a picture where the board is not in the conversation about innovation, and you let this new generation and this new culture change happen. Is that fast enough? Is that effective enough? Are you satisfied with that way?
To be frank with you, we have many challenges, but I'm not satisfied with that.
Okay.
So we have,
no, that's fair enough.
We have a joint venture.
Yeah.
Actually, venture funds, so that we can coordinate outside the company as well.
Okay. We'll come back to these issues, and I'm going to be switching gears a bit. The minister wanted to say something, and I want to pick a few questions from the board.
No, I just wanted to say about the innovation. It's nothing new, and we talk a lot about how the life changed lately because of the digitalization. Well, the biggest innovation was where we started to grow food, where we invented the wheel, steam machine, and then electricity, and each new technical invention resulted in many changes in our lives and working and doing business, very radical. And it's the same situation, only everything is happening a little faster. And what's very important for us is to establish the cooperative environment, even between companies. This is what I'm proud the most because of the, let's say, governmental initiative. Companies started to know each other better because the modern innovations are complex. And you cannot do complex innovation by yourself. Mm-hmm. And this environment, to be able to cooperate to produce a complex innovation is the best, let's say, good wish for the future. And I think we are well on track.
So many of you have spoken about this kind of cultural dimension, whether it's in how you push things in your organization or how you can work with others. Mark, I'm wondering if I could put you a little bit on the spot, given that you work a lot with, if I understood correctly, sort of startups and businesses. How do you recognize, there's a question up there, how do you recognize people with potential for innovations? I mean, at the end of the day, Mr. Sudavran, challenge is to find more of those people with potential for innovation into his organization. So how do you look at this?
That's a tricky question, isn't it?
Yes, and we want a simple answer.
I know. Okay, so first of all, we don't hire people or we don't recruit people for innovation potential because it's just too complex. We recruit people for smartness. We are looking for people that can solve complex problems. And then it turns out that out of those people, maybe there are 20-30% of people who want to do things in a novel way, and the others are more conservative and they want to do, just the job. And then we have to, as managers, whoever is the manager of these people, have to see the potential in the people and say, okay, we have now a project where we need a couple of people to innovate. They should do the architecture. But then we still need a lot of people who should not innovate at all. I mean, we also do medical software. Should we innovate the medical software? And then there is a little bug in the software, the patient dies, and we say, oh, sorry, it was a bug. We will bring the next patient. We will fix it.
Mark, there's a question. Do we sometimes innovate too much? And I think that maybe answers
I
that.
answer that as well. So the point is we should not, innovate for innovation's just sake. We should look for people who are smart enough, and then out of those, we figure out who is an innovator by heart, by talent, and let them do the innovation, and then stop them at the right moment.
So let me press you a little bit, because I used to have this argument in government. How do you recognize people who have that potential? The HR departments wanted to know, what do we need to put on, is it the CV? I used to say it's the sparkle in their eye, which never really held. Yeah. But how do you hire people?
If you want to know somebody, you have to work with this person. That's the only way. CV is good as a sieve. Job interview is also good as a sieve, but at the end of the day, you have to work with somebody together. I mean, your best friends are from school because you were together every day, or from the military because you lived with those people, you slept with those people. And the same thing is good people. You cannot find somebody by his CV. Doesn't work. You can hire people, okay? And that's a problem in Slovenia, by the way, is that the Americans, they have this hire and fire philosophy. So you can hire anybody. If they turn out good, you keep them. If not, you just fire them. In Slovenia, of course, if you hire people, what do you do if it turns out they're not the right people? That's a tricky issue. But we have a solution.
Well, this is what I wanted to. I want to nudge this conversation into thinking about what is the dynamic between business and government. But what you suggest is I should hire people and then see if it works out, which would imply that we need to rethink a bit our labor laws to some degree. Were you wanting to jump in?
I just wanted to say that how I look on finding the right people. Yes, you look the CV, the education, the experiences, and then you make sure that they understand what are the values and what is the mission, and then see what they will do. Yes, it's hard to fire people, but it's usually possible to find the better, different position or something like this. And I have a lot of experiences with people which I was not satisfied with them, but on some other position they're working just fine, just well. But you have to change, you have to move, you have to find your area.
Maybe in this conversation we can find other ways of framing this, like hire, fire is pretty black and white, so maybe there are other ways. One last question before we go into this conversation about the role of government in this mix. Earlier there was a question up on the board, is how, and maybe this is more for bigger organizations, how do you think of the relationship between this innovation conversation, which is about everybody, and your R&D departments? Is it one and the same strategy? Are these two different things? Are all the smart people in R&D and innovations just free candy? Yeah, why don't you give...
So I'm coming out of an old German company, IT company, which is 40 years plus old. So the innovation comes more natural to this industry. So it's happening all the time. But again, this was, let's say, in the SAP it was solved in various aspects, but not only with innovation frameworks like each corporation have. What we did is open the company. So company, 10 years ago, company had 10 Germans in the board. So it was extremely German company. And today it's only 2 Germans still in the board. And in the last couple of years, we did plenty of acquisitions, 50 plus, but they were never merged totally in the company. So they stay where they are geographically. So R&D is moving out of the center. We still keep the classic R&D, which is somewhere in the heart of Germany, with German engineers, the pragmatic German engineers sometimes, but the new innovation is coming from the outside, from the other parts of the globe, and we open to the universities, to the government, to the other organizations. So we work together with other corporations, because today the customer or the organization, they're not buying technology. It's not about the love for technology. It's about the right solution for them. And if we have to step together to offer this for one customer, we will. It's not like football match, one or other team. So.
Yeah. So another way to maybe follow up on this, and I know you have a question here. Let me just very quickly just jump in and say, Are your corporations having maybe new kinds of R&D departments which are about the internal social innovation that's necessary for your organizations to be more creative and more open? But sorry, Ranko, you were jumping in.
If you asked me this question 10 or 5 years ago, I would say that everybody should find its intrinsic value and R&D should do the majority of the job. Currently, with this development in the latest few years, I think it's impossible to be, up to date in every type, especially of new technologies, but also in spotting the perfect need states around the world, especially if you work in a very nationally homogeneous business. It's very difficult to untap any opportunity in Finland or in Taiwan. I was never in Taiwan. So I think it's changing. It's changing, especially another perspective. So we spotted, here Susanna, one guy that was a brilliant guy on one hackathon. And then I approached him and I said, please, can our HR contact you? We'd be very glad that you work for us. And the guy explicitly, 23 years old, foreigner that learned Slovenian perfectly in 2 years, he said, no, I would be very glad to work with you. I said, no, we can employ you permanently, you get a good salary. No, I would like to work with you, not for you. So even this thing is changing. So not only that our argument, whether it should be inner or outside, but it's also what the youngsters want. It looks like apparently they don't want anymore to work for a big company.
Yeah.
So then whatever you think, it's irrelevant because you need to adapt also to the new reality.
Not to use a buzzword that's overused, but it might suggest that much more we need to be working in a networked fashion, where we have a network of people that we can tap in on a need basis. Why don't you last comment on this, and then we'll get into the government conversation.
Yeah, just a quick one. Discussing innovation and how to get the right people into the positions to innovate. We shouldn't fall into this trap of, tightening innovation only to technology innovations. There are people who can innovate business process. There are people who can innovate go-to-market. There are people who can innovate management systems. And before you show the pictures of Tesla, for Tesla, for sure, they need to innovate on all those layers before they were able to put the product on the market.
Yep. I think that's a good point. My example with the mangosteen fruit is that on many of the things that we're dealing with, all the technologies already exist. The bigger heavy lift is innovating and how you finance it, how you collaborate, how you deploy them, how do you see education as an opportunity to develop systems, et cetera, et cetera. Let's migrate to this question about the relationship between government and business now that we got it first here. There's been a series of questions. I'll just read a few of them. Will the barriers between the private and public sector always exist, or will they disappear through time? Which would have to be the one measure in Slovenian public administration that would start the snowball of creativity and innovation rolling. I think when we look at those and other questions, we've inherited maybe a way of thinking. Business is business, and government's role is perhaps to put subsidies or maybe to do some policies, but that the innovation happens there. In countries like my own, I would argue there's been confrontation, that if business starts working with government, it taints the purity of government and these kinds of notions. And I think we're getting much more into a world where actually we're seeing that in order for us to solve a question like the mangosteen question, we need the Department of Education to be working with an infrastructure company that's working with a business that's working, and we're finding much, much more collaborative manners. Maybe in the future, governments won't be providers of services anymore, but the creators of platforms that enable these kinds of collaborations to happen. Whether it's these questions that I just read out, or just the basic relationship between, what do you think needs to change in how we think about government versus or government and business?
May I?
Sure,
First,
of course.
It have to be, it's quite simple, but not communicated enough. What is the role of government? Very simple. We have to write down the regulation that we will all respect together. That means legislation. So we do the regulation through the process of accepting regulation, through the mandatory for parliament and so on. That's one rule. The second rule is to ensure the common services and common infrastructure which none of the companies will build. That's why we collect taxes, to ensure common services like health, education, and so on, and build common infrastructure. like roads, railways, and whatever. And the cooperation with the businesses is getting tighter and tighter because we are using the same infrastructure. But it's built from taxes or co-financed from private sector. So regulation and common services and infrastructure. And this is the main difference between company and government. Company does for a profit, government does for a regulation of common problems and supporting or providing the common services. And this distinction will always stay, I hope.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I may, but what I am afraid for most of the governments is that we don't understand enough the modern technologies and so-called digital space, and we don't play governmental role in the digital place, and where corporations are getting very strong, but not because of corporations, but because governments don't have solutions.
But let me just, on one of those, and maybe I don't know if Sirpa wants to jump in on this, because I know we've had some experiences in Finland too. I think you outlined very clearly some of the things that are part of the purpose of government. But to be a bit difficult, I would say, at least in our country, you can disagree, Sirpa, we're not always very good at creating the right regulatory frameworks. We've had cases where we wanted to regulate, for example, wastewater management in the countryside, and we didn't ask people who actually live there what are the issues. And then we roll something out at a huge expense, not just to businesses, but to societies. So are there ways in which governments can become better at understanding what the need is? And here maybe there's a learning opportunity. It seems businesses are quite good at understanding what the need is. So here, perhaps the overlay is to bring practices of how do you define need in a new kind of context. But I don't know, Sirpa, if you want to jump in a little bit, or if the minister has something you want to push back a bit on.
That I don't spend too much time, just to say, of course, there are very clear rules. That means early communication with the shareholders, what is the common solution that they want, and then you write the legislation. So again, it's in the cooperation, in openness, and that's the key way to have a better legislation. Legislation have to be created with those who will use and live by the legislation after, because the clerks in the offices are not those who write legislation for themselves.
And could legislations change this at the rate of the, as the context changes as well?
It have to change, but it's always slow, and it's always the result of the wider dialogue and wider, let's say, not energy, but general opinion that slowly changes also the legislation. Yep. But the process is too slow. This is also why we are introducing a lot of innovative methods to working with the OECD and so on, how to speed up and have a better legislation.
So this is maybe part of that innovation challenge, is how do you do things differently, not always technology driven. Sorry, Sirpa, you were going to chime in.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, I think that talking about the role of government at the very widest and highest level, it is even more than just providing the regulatory framework for business, but it's kind of like in longer term, if you look at the developments in countries like Finland, like Slovenia, and other European countries, for instance, that there is a certain narrative behind, and I think the government is the carrier of the national narrative, and there are different phases in that. At the moment, we are living the phase of digitalization and robotization, automatization, and the government, of course, has to, the wise government would understand, first of all, understand the phenomenon, to foresee, to invest in foresight activities in the sense that what's happening, what's going on in the society, what's there behind the corner, and then to respond to it. And I would say that in Finland, if I think about the narrative related to digitalization or innovation, of course one cannot avoid the name Nokia, which Marco already...
Sorry.
Yeah. No, you mentioned it. But there used to be this time that in the 1990s, when we had a big bad recession and the economics were bad, Finland, the government of Finland decided determinedly to invest in R&D and education. And even if we were lacking money, but the money that we had in the government budget, we invested and that, in my mind, it was a longer-term kind of investment and longer-term act. in that sense.
yeah.
But then, if we come back to today, it's different than we were thinking. That then the government and business relationship was kind of one way in my mind. You know, that the government was giving subsidies. There was a heavy investment in R&D, and we established new organizations within the government to run the financing instruments for business and so on. Now it's different, but we still have this. We have the same problems. But what I want to say is that at the moment, I think that in Finland the discussion is not anymore so much on how the government can help business, but it's also, has been said many times here, that it's a interactive and cooperative thing. But there is more than that. I think the Finnish government is now concerned of employment. Employment is the biggest issue because we understand it as part of our welfare system. With unemployment, we will lose little by little our welfare system. And why I'm saying is that the government is a carrier of the narrative. In the Finnish narrative, the welfare state, commitment to welfare state is very, very strong. Yep. That's why the government thinking and discussion in Finland is linked with, for instance, when we talk about digitalization, is what happens to our jobs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, let me come to that, because that's a very interesting question. And just to put the Finnish narrative clearly, I would say as a Finn, so you can insult me later and say I was wrong. But I think for a very long time, this sense of an ideal state that is built around welfare, to some degree meant that business was seen as a kind of necessary evil. And I think we've come to the point where we're actually having this conversation based on employment, which is very interesting. And now we're finally seeing that we are allied in the same. Now, you talked a lot about we need to do things quicker, we need to adapt and understand how to regulate. We talked about foresight, and you talked about digitalization. So I'd like maybe to pick Mr. Tsuda's mind just a moment, because you're in the business of robots. And one of the big things that robots stir at the emotional level is they're taking our jobs away. Yeah. So how does government react to these, not just small changes, but radical shifts? We were talking at breakfast, you know, is taxing robots then the solution to your problem, Sirpa? Or is that a bit silly?
Yeah, actually, robot is taking our jobs, but creating more jobs than taking away. And actually, robot has been there for, what we manufacture is not service robot, but the industrial robot to make cars and clothes. But it's been there for maybe 40 years there. And gradually they are adapting to the world, but I don't say it's innovative product yet. And we have to have collaboration between AI and new way of engineering and robot to make it happen as an innovative product and then to change the society. But actually, we do robots, but that itself is just a tool. I mean, we have to, but the most important thing is that people to think what is the most innovative way of doing things and then giving that task to the robot. And unfortunately, we don't have enough people to that way of thinking yet. Yeah. So we need more innovative people to utilize robots.
But isn't your challenge and the challenge of any of you who are bringing new things into the marketplace, not just to figure out how they can be better and meet better services and whatever produced, but also that the regulatory environment understands how to make those opportunities possible? Because if people are talking about taxing robots, to me it seems like applying a past logic on a current reality. So you spend a lot of time with government having these conversations?
Actually, a robot is a very dangerous species. I mean, it can kill people in reality. So we need deregulation sometimes to utilize robot freely, working with human being. And actually, we need a progress to the robot itself. But in Japan, government is working to give us some specific fields for the implementation. Social implementation is a kind of inevitable way to get the robot practical. And one of the examples is that the care house. So we started to use robots for care house. And one of the initiatives, Japan, we have 5 initiatives for innovation in Japan. And one of the, at the top, it's along the healthy life lengths of Japanese, because we have a healthcare problem. I mean, budget problem, financial problem. And then we're trying to utilize robot for that purpose. And then suppose sometimes deregulation, sometimes new regulation, people, caregivers cannot, should not carry more than 20 kilograms or something as a new regulation to have more
to push these
push those so that even elderly people can take care of elderly people.
Yep. So
I
know the minister had some questions. I'd also like to hear from the business community in terms of what do you think a new relationship with government looks like? Is it like we've had, or is there something else? And there's a whole bunch of questions, I won't read them all, which are asking sort of what should the government do, what is the one kind of action, et cetera, et cetera. So I think people are interested in hearing a little bit from the business perspective, what should government be doing in this new relationship? Minister?
Very simply said that legislation is not the leading of innovation. So when some innovation is accepted, needed, used, then you regulate it. But you don't jump with legislation is not a very innovative area. So when it comes to the jobs and new technologies, it's historically the same thing. When we, I don't know, invented tractors, you know that, I don't know, 150 years ago or 100 years ago, 85% of people worked on field just to feed ourselves. Today, I think we have 0.8% of people working in farming, but 80% of people is not out of the job. Only they do different things. It's the same with the robots, it's the same with all the other technology. That's important. But the government have to be also faster. Response time is the problem. So this is why, for example, we're introducing the innovative methods. We teach public employees to gamification, to teamwork. This is why we are building the different cloud infrastructure, opening data and so on, that we can respond faster. But legislation will always follow the innovation. And when I ask companies what kind of a regulation they want, they always say, deregulate. And then we come to the concrete question and said, we want it clearly written down. Well, it's not the regulation. So the regulation comes with the trust.
But maybe there's a shade of gray, because I understand this deregulating argument. It gives you freedom to do things and not be so bound. But on the other hand, when you regulate, for example, in Finland, I'm going back at an imaginary time, that we declare that every single student is going to have a certain basic kind of education, it does subsequently mean there's a cascade of things. Every municipality has to build a school. There have to be this many so on services, et cetera, et cetera. So there's both sides to this argument. I know that you had a question. Why don't you jump in, Sirpa, if you had a quick comment to that, and then...
Yeah, I agree with the minister. Actually, the businesses cannot request from the government that the government will regulate, let's say, artificial intelligence or robotics, because we are moving too fast. So we all know these exponential theories, and on step 4 or 5, we are so far away that we cannot see each other anymore. But I believe that the right way to go is now that the businesses start communicate more and establish a new standards of business ethics and moral that will later become a legislation. But after we agree on it, otherwise this will not happen. We cannot wait for the government. We are in extremely gray area already with all this data collection we are using.
But this is a pretty radical shift that you're outlining. I mean, if I think of the innovation that has to happen not just in business-government relationship, but within administrations, it means there has to be a very different way of doing things. You don't lead with policies, actually, in a way you lag with policies.
Yeah, we propose, but we have to propose more. So we cannot request, we have to come with actual proposals.
Yep.
And this will be a live stuff, so it will change probably monthly.
Okay. Sirpa, did you want to jump in quickly and then...
Just one more kind of dimension to this very simple issue that we are discussing, maybe to make it even more simple, is when we talk about the role of the state, at least in Finland, in a country like Finland, it's also the dialogue with the trade partners, trade unions and employers. And here is one point, which is that the threat or the risk or the feeling of losing present kind of jobs. It's true that people understand in Finland that they will be replaced by new kinds of jobs, but there is this resistance to the change, because there's a lot of kind of
anxiety. Yeah.
Yeah.
But this is natural.
And I think that the role of the government is also to at least in our system, it participates in the discussion between the employers and employees organizations in order to kind of raise the level of discussion, if you like, I mean, to the future of Finland, not only like who is losing and what. And I don't know if you have, what's the situation here in Slovenia, but I see that is one of the roles of the government as well.
Yeah. So I think you touch on a very kind of complex thing. There's a very nice English saying that I'd rather have the devil I know than the angel I don't. So you'd rather have all the problems you know, because you know how to deal with them, than this promise. And I think that's part of this anxiety. Layered on that, if the role of government is to create some form of stability so that people don't freak out so much, that could be counter to some of your ideas that actually the world is changing so fast that creating that idea of stability is counterproductive. Maybe there needs to be a different idea of stability that enters in here. I know there's, did you want to say something and then maybe we'll come to you?
Yeah, briefly about what we just discussed. I mean, I definitely do not subscribe to this point of view that there are two different worlds, government and the private sector and big barriers between themselves. Definitely not. I mean, we have different roles and that's fine. But what really we should improve due to everything and due to all the innovation, what is happening today is the speed of this feedback loop. I mean, the feedback loop is there, it needs to be there, and in the Slovenian case, recently it improved a lot, so we have the feedback loop. The speed of reaction and the speed of this feedback loop would be a new quality in this business-to-government relation.
To me, that would suggest that how we think about planning in institutions needs to change. So planning is we want all the facts, and then the facts will tell us what to do, and that's a very lengthy and heavy kind of process. But Michael.
Okay. First of all, I come from Hong Kong, and then I do see a lot of similarities between Hong Kong and Slovenia. Specifically, Slovenia has a small population, 2 million, and Hong Kong has 7.5. Both Hong Kong and Slovenia, a lack of natural resources. We are small in manufacturing, but we are actually basically a trading hub. So in Hong Kong, part of the government policies, they tend to put a lot of money into education and research. But ironically speaking, from the business side, the private sector, people always complain mainly because the scientific research or innovation in research doesn't necessarily help the manufacturers or enterprises to solve the problems that they're currently facing at the moment. So they're very short-sighted. So the government might have a very good long-term intent for innovation, but the business sector doesn't necessarily receptive or possibly reactive to it. I think so. I think it lies into the hands of the government role responsibility to how to balance the long-term intention and also the short-term disruption. So that's one. I think second, I think from my perspective as from the private sector is that oftentimes the failure of innovation sometimes is due to the lack of communication skills of the government. Quite frankly, because I see that even the Hong Kong government or other governments, they have done a lot of good things for the industry, for the society, but the message doesn't get sent abroad, and people don't know, basically. And then that creates a lot of misunderstanding from the private sector of thinking that the government has not done enough. Yeah. So I think that's a huge thing, at least in Hong Kong and also in China.
I think there's a couple interesting things there. I want to read one question, and then I'm going to shift gears just a little bit, if you don't mind. Actually, when I was teaching at Harvard, we used to get a complaint from business owners. And the complaint was, we hire your students, and then we have to train them. You're not doing a good enough job at preparing students who are a capable workforce for us. And our dean at the time was a very smart gentleman and said, "Oh, you got it wrong. We're not training your employees, we're training your future competition." And so, in a way, it was about meeting the current need versus, and this was a very elegant rhetoric, but thinking about what those future needs are. And the more we feed current needs, the more we entrench those kinds of incentives. I'd like to maybe use that as a little bridge to get into a bit of a conversation about HR. And then I would like to end with a bit of Slovenia. There's a question up there. We don't need to answer now, but what should what is the one advice business representatives would give to national stakeholders and decision makers? So maybe we'll end on some of those kinds of questions. Before we get to HR, I'd like just a bit to go back to one of the things I premised before. Innovation, I think, should be thought of as a way of mitigating risks. The context is changing so quickly, we can't just keep doing the things we've always done. And that's the impetus for actually trying to do new things. So how in your organizations do you manage risk, the risk of doing new things? How good are you at learning organization, as being a learning organization that can adapt to that? How much thinking are you and the management team spending on thinking about how you're good at learning? I think when you talk about startups, they're by nature, because it's a small group, very adaptable and agile. But as they begin to grow, they build in incentives to maintain the status quo to some degree. So how do you think about risk and building a learning organization around successes and failures? Anybody want to jump in there? Or is that too vague? Yep.
I mean, in our industry, no innovation can provide a bigger risk than doing nothing. You know, the status quo is by far the biggest risk. I mean, it's.
But I'll remind you of the Nokia story. We see this over and over.
Which is the same example, right? I mean, you know, if innovation stops at a certain point, that's a sure road to a disaster in the technology sector. So innovating is not perceived as being risky. Innovating is perceived as business as usual.
So maybe connected to the Nokia story, I think the biggest risk that I faced until now in my career, and even now facing it, is basically to use classical management tools. And I think that the portfolio metrics is one of the biggest trap that you can get in, and Nokia was on one of those that basically went into the wrong quadrant and wrongly assessed the opportunity of the product for the future. And this is where you need to develop and get to know other tools. Especially the most critical stuff is that at the end, it's a lot of intuition and personal talent. And it's very difficult to be measured. So how we do it until now, and now we do it in a very different way. So I think first is that doing nothing is the biggest risk, and I agree with that. And that's why you need to first discover what will be the future of doing nothing. Slovenia is relatively conservative, and there is often a thought that the thing can last for ages. And so you need to put an effort to do the sense of urgency. So when you do the sense of urgency a little bit, it's easier to go forward. The other thing is to do a broader vision, to be very bold, to do mission, values, and so on, but really live them. But then to start to change small project by small project. I even wrote a theory about it. It's called strategic wormhole. Basically, how you basically do a wormhole with a small part of the business. You change it, you turn back, and you try to drag the whole business behind you, because it's very unlikely that any shareholder or bigger stakeholders will let you change everything in a sudden way. So I think the sense of urgency is the way how to address the issue, and how good are you in addressing the sense of urgency, and how good are you in changing the classical tools, because most of the classical tools the management uses are from 70s, from late 60s and early 80s, and you need to adapt quickly. So you need to change the educational system to it, you need to change yourself, and this is very, very difficult and questionable for somebody.
Yeah. I'd be curious in this HR, the kind of people, the culture change that needs to happen. what's a time frame for those changes? My fear would be, without knowing anything, is that if you take a bit of an evolutionary approach, that things will evolve and we'll have new institutions that can teach the next generation a bit differently. Slovenia's missed the window of opportunity. Finland's missed the window of opportunity. So there are things clearly that need to happen at the speed of this year, next 3 years, and then there are longer term kinds of projects that need to happen. But going back to this, I know, Minister, you had the microphone, so maybe you wanted to jump in. Feel free.
I would just like to say that in my line of business, we also have the same risk of doing nothing or doing too slow. Then you are becoming obsolete because you are not reacting in time for the needs of the environment, because of a new invention, because of a new social connection. So there is also a question what we did innovative in that way that we did something. First, the Partnership for a Change as a project was mentioned. Very innovative. Why? To have a closer contact to the businesses that we can react faster. Cloud infrastructure, which was built in very innovative way, unique, was built just that we can communicate faster with us and outside. We did some very, very progressive things on open data, because open data means that we are better connected with what we do and with the businesses, and better controlled, because transparency is the best control that we did. Big data analytics, what we did, so that we predict what will happen in the social area, health area, employment area, because every unemployment which was re-educated on time will not spend the social benefits because he will earn his salary. So we gain development money instead of social transfers money. The same goes in health, the same goes in different other areas. So prediction. Introducing, for example, gaming in the public administration as a way of fast solving complex problems. And this is what we are talking. If you want robots to take some job, it's a very complex problem. Who is responsible? Who will, what if something happens? What will be with the job? So I know that interest of industry is bring in robots, but then it's a public. Who will lose the job? Do we trust them? Who is responsible? So these are very complex problems. And complex problems have to be addressed in a very modern, innovative ways, and this is what we are doing. Many kind of very interesting stuff inside of the government, because if you see one demand for the legislation change, from one perspective it's totally clear, but we have sometimes hundreds of perspectives and only one article have to be written down. This is not so simple anymore.
Yeah, yeah. So we've spoken about a lot of dimensions, but I'd be curious maybe to spend the next 5 minutes, and then maybe, unless there's some big questions that we want to grab, we could then bring this to a close. What does the business sector, given that we're trying to focus that, feel would be your recommendation that in Slovenia needs to happen? You talked about a very conservative culture, for example. How do you change that? Not as a generational project, but now. We in Finland, for example, recognize, I think we were having this conversation yesterday, that there is not enough mobility between public and private sector. So there's very few people in Finland who have experience of what that other reality is. What are some of the mechanisms and things you could do to accelerate? Yeah.
So I think first is a kind of a metaphorical but also strategical thing. So I would just turn the pyramid and put bigger companies and bigger institutions to the bottom of the pyramid, and put the startups and put the entrepreneurs. Slovenia has 60% of GDP coming out of export, mainly from SMEs and so on. So those people are not prized enough, in my opinion. There is a huge talent in the country to export goods, to do new things. So we are kind of one of the leaders, small leaders in blockchain technology and so on. And I think this is not, we deal too much with ourselves, with maybe even past businesses. So I think metaphorically we should prize those that could be the winners of the future. The second thing I would say that is very important, that what is our strategy to value our products and services more? Because currently, I have a friend, he's a director of Spring, it's a Singapore agency for development and for innovation. And the guy says always, their role is to internationalize Singapore businesses, small or big one, to finance them. They even made for angel, other investors, some taxational benefits, if you invest there. They also educate people for that. They're also aiming to somehow to raise the value of the services and the products of the Singapore as a country. This was done in the 60s with Italy. Everything was done around the design. So today we talk about Italy as we are willing to pay even €1,000 or €10,000 for a design part of the product from Italy, not maybe from Finland too, not maybe from other country, not to name it, but also not willing too much to pay about technology from Italy or something else. So basically, you can direct where you go, and you should have, why should I, as a worker, as a manager, be lower paid internationally than somebody else? This is also a role of us as bigger companies, or especially the government or some institutions, paragovernmental and so on. So I would start by a clear vision of having an international country with international education. So I think we should add in our education many more international professors and many more exchange. I think it's not good to, we stick too much probably with ourselves, and I'm personally frustrated. I'm always trying to go a few years around, to work or to study around the globe. So somehow to change that. If I could change myself, I would change that 20, 25 years ago. And I would advise also that others starts. You can turn back to Slovenia and bring those things back.
So I think those are interesting ideas. So if you find strategies to internationalize, which might be around education, I don't know if as the industry around robots grows, you have Japanese businesses and others, whether they are also points to build international schools around, or Michael, as you were talking yesterday, we were talking about some of the sort of east-west infrastructure that's being built globally, whether those are also sort of opportunities. And we know that the more international your schools are, the easier it is to hire anywhere. In Finland, our dilemma is, why do we limit our hiring pool to the 5 million people that are in Finland? Why don't we think of our hiring pool as being anyone who meets this particular need? But you need the services, you need the schools, and you need enough businesses and languages in country to make that possible. Michael, you want to jump in? Or?
Just real quick, just echoing to the previous comment. I just want to cite an example from Hong Kong, and so talking about attracting foreign investors and startups, because a lot of, as we know, a lot of innovation comes from the private sector and from startups. In Hong Kong, okay, there's an incident a few years back. We lost the biggest IPO in history to New York Stock Exchange. And that is Alibaba's IPO listing. So it's the largest in history. And what happened was Alibaba, before going public, they requested the special voting rights to protect the founding members. So even if they do not have the majority of shares, they will remain to have the majority of voting rights. And Hong Kong Stock Exchange, at first they actually approached Hong Kong Stock Exchange, but Hong Kong Stock Exchange back then, being rigid and stick to the traditional way of protecting all shareholders among different types of shares, they refused, denied the request. So then they turned to New York Stock Exchange, and that was a huge blow to Hong Kong. And but now we are going to have, I think in light of that, as a result, we are going to have a new board on Hong Kong Stock Exchange, which are aimed to attract startups and being more flexible in terms of all these voting rights and also the entry barrier, etc. So I think to me that's one of the huge innovative kind of initiative that Hong Kong government has recently.
So let me ask a last question, and then we'll see if the audience wants to chime in on something. So I think if we're thinking about a Slovenian agenda, there may be things around education, the internationalization, maybe partnerships that. There's the question about the investment community and how do you make those investments possible. There was a conversation here about a more agile way of working. So that I think the smaller the country, like many of us, the more agile you are, that could be your competitive advantage. You don't have giant industry to compete with. You have your agility to compete with. So let me come to the question of agility here. I think you guys are similar. Sorry for bringing Finland into the fold, but I'm a very limited person. That's my only experience. We used to think, I think a few years ago, up to 360 municipalities, something like that, in a tiny country. I think you're organized more or less like that. You have lots of municipalities in this country. How is being small and the structure of that smallness both an asset and a liability? What would you like to change in that mix? And to bring it back to Nokia, I'm sorry, forgive me, but one of the arguments for the birth of Nokia was that there was no international business that wanted to do business with Finland because the market was so small. You had to do 360 separate tiny agreements. And hence there was an in-country solution that was born. So we could see that as a positive too. We see it also as a limited. How do you see the smallness of Slovenia as an asset or a liability? What would you think we should reconsider in that mix? Anybody want to jump in?
Well, we agreed that we will not talk that Slovenia is small, but just the right size.
Just the right size. Everyone is too big.
It's much better.
Sorry.
But what's our advantages? Around 80% of our GDP we directly export. So we are already on the international market, because Slovenian market is so small that if you want to do something serious, you have to go outside. Also, what I strongly believe, we have to be part of the international community when it comes to the government. And this government, I have to do a little bit propaganda, but we really strengthen the communication with all kind of international organization, bilateral. We go around, we fly, we go to the OECD, to the Commission, to the United Nations, to the Dubai, to I don't know where, because we want to be a creative part of a global world. And if you not interact with others, we will not do business with others. So we have to be part of a common solutions, and we invest a lot of energy in internationalization, not only business, but also the government. And this is one of our key, let's say, direction. And when it comes to, we have 212 local communities. Well, it could be a problem, but on the other hand, they bring diversity. This is why Slovenia is on so small place, so much different.
Just right, so just right.
Just right, but with the local communities is not the problem how many of them it is there. The problem is that one is with 400 residents and the other is with 280,000 residents, but they have all the same tasks. That's the biggest problem. So we say cooperate. Share the tasks. We support them with the software, with the cloud infrastructure. There was a question, most productive innovation solutions during our mandate. Definitely very innovative free layer cloud infrastructure, which was awarded and very well accepted, and it's growing very fast. And definitely Partnership for a Change as a project which launched very tight cooperation between government and business. This was innovative and very successful. And this is how we look. We have to go out and we have to communicate and be part of the global world if we want to have a global market for our local businesses.
Yep. Anybody from the business community want to weigh in on Slovenia's just right size question?
Well, I can
and then I'll
comment a bit.
Yep.
I have experience from various corporations, but also startups. And sometimes it was an obstacle to be from Slovenia because there was a trust issue. Nobody knew where Slovenia is, and I was in software industry. So when we approached, let's say, Austrians with our software, they said, no, we're not buying this software. But when we gave this software to a German guy and he said, this is American software, it was okay. So they were buying it. But I believe that this was 10 plus years ago, but I believe that today Slovenia is well known in this high-tech industry. And it's a really good playground because it's a right size of the country for experiments. So we have a pretty strong governmental organization. We have a lot of representations of the foreign companies. The educational system is good. So we produce a lot of engineers that are also being trained a lot in Austria later on or some neighboring countries, but they're coming back too. So I believe also these municipalities, okay, they're there. We have 212 of them, but Austrians have 6,000 municipalities. So this shouldn't be a big problem. The problem is in governance later on. Some municipalities are insanely successful in industry. Some are not. So we have to transfer the good practice from good municipalities to some that are not so good. We can do this with technology because I'm going from this industry, and technology is always the answer.
So if I was going to write on that, I would suggest that one of the roles of government should be, as innovations happen in these different municipalities, to take those innovations and spread them and make them the new standard. And that means probably at some level working with businesses very closely to experiment in the places that have the best capacity to take on maybe risk. So you don't maybe want to go innovate at different. I know you had a quick question, and then I want to take a few questions from the audience in case people weren't device friendly.
Yeah, I wanted just to comment, size doesn't matter. You know, the world is flat, right? We know now that the world is not round, but the world is flat because of technology. And the sense is with size. You can have a small startup that is worldwide active because digitalization and copying and all that. And the same thing goes with the nation. I really like this, you know, I was in a pub once and I saw this nice slogan. And it says, think globally, drink locally. And the same thing is here. We are in a global world. It's not our choice to be global or not global. And Slovenia and the government cannot change it. You have all the power. You can shoot me. But that's all you can do. You cannot change the world. So we Slovenians, we should be aware that we are a small little boat, you know, on a big ocean of globalization. And we have to face it. We have to adapt to it. On the other hand, when we live locally. So we should enjoy the benefits of Slovenia. Slovenia is the... And people ask me, why is COSELAB, our company based in Slovenia, you work with accelerators, you don't have one in Slovenia, so why are you here? Because we work globally, but we love to live here. It's a fantastic country, it's a fantastic countryside, it's a nice culture, the language is fantastic. We have a dual, nobody else has it, or almost nobody. Even you don't have it, I think.
We haven't.
You have? Okay.
Different languages.
So this is, I think, what you know, how we should think. And then the other thing about government is that Slovenian government is really just a municipality. Sorry to say, but there is probably a street in Hong Kong or maybe in Beijing that has more inhabitants than Slovenia has. And the rules we get the rules from European Union, we get the rules from the world, from, you know, our government can only play so much within its limitations. So we should also, again, think like a municipality. And then if we have 200 small municipalities or one big, it doesn't really matter. And the last thing is that because we are really a municipality, we should work like this. You know, in Slovenia, we had, in the old times, there were the three power people in the village, right? It was the innkeeper, it was the priest, and it was the teacher or something. Those three people defined what we have to do. And the same thing is here. You know, we are business, you are government, but we work together because we have a common, well, I wouldn't say enemy, but a common competition, which is the global world. And now this is what is lacking for Slovenia, if I may say so much, is that Slovenians, we are both very egalitarian and very competitive. Egalitarian means that we are, you know, for fairness. We have the laws, we want to be fair. We don't want that the neighbor has more than I have, and so on. But we're also competitive. So we use the fairness to compete against our neighbor. Now, this is the mistake we made. We should use our competitiveness, like our sports people. We should find somebody outside to compete against, like the Finnish. We should say, you know,
easy there.
In 5 years, Slovenia should be better than Finland, richer, whatever, more democratic, more educated. And then we will win.
So I think you want to set your bar higher than Finland. But anyhow, we can come back to that. I want to take a couple questions. I just want to correct one thing for the record. I don't think the government can shoot you. Just to be clear.
Yeah, just to make you sure that you are going to confront a very tough competitor, because the Finnish government has just launched in one of its policy papers this ambition that Finland wants to be the world's best environment for innovation and experimentation. World's best. Not Europe.
All right. So.
No, that's, I agree. I like your goal, and we will have a smaller, less ambitious goal. We want to be better only than Finland.
Okay. Good. Maybe one or two questions. Did you want to have a quick question here?
I would like to add an information about innovation in Slovenia, which is everything confirming what my good student, former student said. And he is one of these hidden champions. Slovenia, we made a research of 185 companies in Bled School of Management, 185 companies in Central and Eastern Europe. And we discovered that these are so-called hidden champions that are number 1 or 2 in the world in their field, in their specific niche. And Slovenia has 16 such companies. Sweden has 2 per million of inhabitants. And talking about how big is Slovenia, then you know that 16 is more than 2 per million. And COSILAB is one of them. So there was a book published in Springer, and you can load it down from Springer, you know, on your computer, and you will see what a fantastic 16 companies, mostly in high tech. And yesterday was here, I would like to use this occasion to say something. Yesterday, another thing about Serbia. Yesterday was a Prime Minister of Serbia in the festival hall talking about how Serbia is innovative in IT. Serbia has indeed, our research showed, has 14 companies famous worldwide. I mean, number 1 or 2 in the world in this field. So I would like just to confirm.
Great. I recognize we run out of time, but I want to give a last, if somebody has something that's really not making, yeah? We're all going to sleep okay tonight? Okay. So anyhow, maybe 2 concluding words. One is, I think it's been very interesting. I mean, it's a very complex and broad topic. But the context that we live in is changing probably at a rate that's hard to predict. And I think the traditional ways of planning, the traditional ways of managing risk, the traditional ways of thinking about do people work in an organization or outside of an organization, many of those things are being revisited. And including in that, I think, is part of what is the partnership and the purpose and role of government and business. And I actually think that the more and more there is the opportunity to converge, that we can meet our long-term sustainability needs, which are generally what governments have been responsible for, making sure the next generation is equipped better than this generation, is actually in business interest. And I think quite interesting, which we haven't talked about, are the new forms of business. In the US, we have things like B corporations, where it's not just a traditional corporate model that's responsible for quarterly shareholder value, but a B corporation puts legal obligations on a long term. And so it begins to behave more like governments have traditionally thought about risk and long-term action. And so I think these are very, very interesting. I think the big question for all of us is how do we manage that constant change? And as I said, I think we need to maybe forget planning as we've thought about it, both in corporations and businesses, and use maybe buzzwords like prototyping, but iterative processes, and we talked about the feedback loop. We've even seen the feedback loop in the Q&A session here, right? So I think quite effective way to get a lot of people's questions up, and we've noticed that people are able to indirectly respond to them or directly respond to them. How do you do that at an institutional scale and at a country scale? Absolutely. Many, many other topics. My other point was, it's the shortest topic in the world, is that you guys have been fabulous and they've been even more fabulous. We'll continue the Slovenia-Finland thing later. Okay, thanks.